All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining. So we have a topic to talk about today, but first I'll have everyone introduce ourselves. Michelle, do you want to go first?
Yeah, my name is Michelle, the Udo Pantograph. I don't know. That's all I have. I'm mostly active on YouTube, on Instagram, but I just started a YouTube channel. But yeah, there's nothing on there if you're wondering.
You have a few videos on there, and I definitely have.
Not much.
And I do have both of their channels linked below, so that way you can check out their videos and subscribe. All right, Vivi, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm Vivi, and I have a YouTube channel called Veevsmack, also very sporadically uploading stuff there. And then I have an Instagram too, but I actually don't even really always post about perfume on there. So I have both.
Great. And the thing I love about your Instagram page is that it covers film too, which is something I'm really into. So I really appreciate that. Okay, so what we'll talk about today is the term niche as it pertains to fragrances. Oh, we lost.
Oh, where did Michelle go?
Oh no. Hopefully she'll sign back on. Well, I'll let her in.
Yeah, when she comes back. Hi, everyone.
All right, and then so before we get into the topic, if everyone can list their scent of the day. I always love hearing what people are wearing, just so I could get ideas.
I'm wearing something you have, Eve.
Oh, what do you have? Or what do you have on?
I have Shen.
Oh, I love Shen. Great. We were just talking about our scent of the day, Michelle.
Yeah, I had to adjust my camera because it was like way out there, and I had to like look up. But I'm back. I'm wearing Black Tie by Celine. I've been wearing this for the last 2 weeks.
I'm excited to try that because, oh, what was that? Sorry.
No, I was saying I haven't worn anything else. I don't know. I guess I like it that much.
That's great. I have a sample of that, but I have not tried it yet. So I am looking forward to trying that. I'm wearing, so today I'm wearing Versailles Taste and Do, which I know Michelle just got to. It's just a really nice gourmand fragrance. And it's a little bit warmer today, but I'm trying to squeeze in the last few wintry type of fragrances before spring comes around.
I wore this flannel shirt thinking that, it's going to be, cooler. And then I'm just like a little bit hot in my room now.
All right, so let's see what everyone's wearing.
Gunmanel's wearing the new Hermes scent. I'm interested in that.
Oh, I saw a review on that.
I saw that today. I didn't know that was happening.
Unknown Pleasures. I love that one, but I swapped it.
You dropped it?
Yeah.
No, I swapped it. I gave it to somebody else.
Oh, got it.
But I used to have a bottle of that.
Nice.
That's funny, Vivi, because I swapped mine too. I actually swapped it for Slow Dive by Hiram Green.
Oh, I like that one.
I've heard great things about that. That is definitely on my to-try list.
I've done so much swapping, I actually don't remember what I got for it, but it was like
this was a recent one.
All right, Petra's wearing Francesca Bianchi fragrances.
Yeah, I like them both.
Great, a lot of great SOTDs in here. Oh, hey, Cherie.
Hi, Cherie.
By the way, I do have a little guest here. He's probably just going to chill and sleep here, but he needs to be next to someone at all times, so that's why he's here with me. All right. So for today's topic, this kind of got, I guess, introduced because I had posted something in my stories around what we think about Guerlain. Is it a niche fragrance house? Is it designer? Is it neither? Is it both? And then both of you replied to that story and you made really interesting points. And that kind of inspired me to want to talk about it on a live stream because I feel like there are lots of things to unpack here, a lot of opinions on what niche is and the state of perfumery. So I just wanted to talk about that. So I do have a few talking points. I do want this to be kind of laid back though. It's not going to be like a serious Zoom meeting, or at least that's not what I intend. But the first thing I did want to ask everyone here, including in the chat, is how do we define niche? Because what I've noticed from the responses to my stories, there seem to be very different opinions on what that means. And if you're the type of person who doesn't really use that word, how do you think most perfume heads define that?
So, I mean, for me, when I first started, exploring perfumes, this was just early last year, and I heard the term niche. I kind of associated it with a niche house, being that's their area of specialization is perfumes only, and nothing else. And then eventually that got it just got more complicated. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? So that was my initial thought about it. So these days, I think a lot of people associate that with like the audience, right? So like they're trying to appeal to a specific kind of audience. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what everyone else has to say about that.
Yeah. How about yourself, Vivi?
Yeah, I can't really remember. I'm sure I've used the word before. But because I'm not as tuned into what like general fragcom or fragrance community is doing, I don't know if I have heard it used in a way that like bothers me or something like that as much as other people. I just tend to think of it more like the definition of niche being part of a whole. So for me, and I think we'll get to this eventually, because the word itself doesn't really mean much if you're just describing a fragrance as niche, because something can be niche in a variety of ways. It could be niche in one way, like scent, and then not niche in terms of accessibility or distribution or price or something like that. So yeah, I think it's a term that I've seen used because people do like niche versus designer. I know that's what kind of sparked this topic. And I see people doing lists of like, what's your favorite niche and what's your favorite designer? But I don't tend to really think about it that way at all. I'd always rather give more nuance to that word.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what both of you said. I think for myself, when I've used that term, I've found myself always comparing it to designer or mainstream houses. I always feel like I can't define that without referring to the designer type of brands. And I think that's just because of how I kind of came to discover niche fragrances in my journey. I don't like using it to describe a scent profile or what a fragrance smells like. I think that just doesn't make sense to me. I guess the way I would define it is it's kind of opposite of what a lot of mainstream brands do, where they spend a lot of money on things like marketing and trying to formulate these fragrances that match with the brand's image if they create things like clothing, for example. But even I have a hard time defining that. I see some people put some things in the chat here. So Amina says, I always thought niche was a term used for a brand that only does fragrance. They may be mass market, but they only do fragrance. Artisanal is different.
I've heard of that before. That what you said, Michelle, like it only does fragrance. But if you look at a lot of things that I think most people would think of as like small, independent, artisanal, or niche, those creators are making soaps, they're making other products, it's always expanding. And nowadays people are getting really creative, in my opinion. So you have postcards and stuff like that. Like just because someone is not doing like a fashion show doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a brand with a lot of different lines of products.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also when it comes to like, how do you create something for a specific market? Like, how do you figure that out? So if a niche house, or if you call a niche perfume as being created for a specific kind of person, or someone, or people who prefer something different or whatever, how do they figure that out? How is that? So it's very broad. Like it's really hard to do when it comes to that. But because something I've heard actually is when perfume houses create things for like, I guess, the mass market, is the testing, how they test it out. They get people in and have them smell different things, and whatever the people like the most is what they will put out there in the market just to make money. But when it comes to like a niche perfume or whatever, if they're creating something for example, let's say Dior Privé line, their private collection. I know that when they create perfume for, I guess, Sauvage or whatever, everyone test it out. A lot of people like Sauvage and they'll put that out. But when it comes to their private collection, and them creating things for a specific group of people, how do they test that out? How do they determine that that's what this market wants? So that's kind of that's where things start to get confusing.
Yeah. And I think some people kind of differ on whether they consider exclusive lines or private collections as being niche. I've seen some people consider it to be part of that category, but then others don't. All right, so I see Chris/Camille say that, I guess there's kind of like a spectrum here. So artisan, and then independent, niche, or masstige. I know that's a term they often use in their videos. And then mass market in terms of size. Niche is usually bought out by a big umbrella company like Estee Lauder, LVMH, but with the illusion of independence. Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
I've heard too that a bigger company might, start a smaller company and basically try to target an audience that is looking for something more exclusive or niche, and the purchaser, the consumer, might not even really realize that, oh, well, this is just a small company related to this bigger company. And like making a thing is saying, if a big company like Estee Lauder buys it out, and both brands, the so-called niche or the so-called designer, is kind of answering to the same shareholders, then is there really a difference?
Yeah.
That's where the problem with labels and comes to where we have to define them, right? That's why I don't I'm not a fan of labels. So I don't like to label things necessarily, but because we end up coming into to this problem where we have to define them, and where there's different opinions about what's designer, what's niche, what's whatever. I feel like with niche perfumes, we now we have these subcategories, right? Like with what Chris and Camille just mentioned. Now we have the artisan, we have independent, which a lot of times I guess artisan perfumes would be niche, but then we have all these subcategories, and then it just becomes just redundant and just confusing. So and I feel like that's kind of like where my head was when I stopped using the term niche to define things, just because it's very broad. Like I don't have a definition of it, and I don't,
Yeah. Labels definitely help businesses more than they help people buying stuff, I think. I mean, that's exactly the kind of mentality that a board of directors would be asking when someone proposes a business model, right? They'd be like, well, who's your market? Is it a more niche market or a more mass market? And so for us to buy into that and really follow along, that is just adding to that kind of machinery.
Yeah. Like I guess, like now niche is a selling point, right? For this perfume companies is, using that term as a selling point, even though defining it is a problem, because no one, I guess you could slap the name niche and then anyone could just buy into it just because they feel like it could be better. But is it really better than something else? And I know we'll touch on that eventually, but
yeah, that's really interesting, Michelle, because I was thinking about like YouTube brands and stuff like that in a way that they're niche, right? Because the fragrance community and perfume on the internet is a subsection of all consumers who buy perfume. So basically anything that we're seeing people talk about on YouTube as like niche versus designer is already part of this tiny, tiny little subsection of perfume market. And maybe it's growing, maybe it's becoming bigger and that's changing. Maybe it is becoming more mainstream. But at a certain point, we're just becoming like a more defined market to sell to if we label it.
All right, I do have another question, but I wanted to read this point from Petra. So she said, what niche should do is fill some gap in the market. What matters in the end is whether the product is good quality, sustainable, and good value. Okay.
That's a great point, yeah.
All right, so I think this was a question that Michelle kind of brought up when we were messaging each other. But how do you think this word kind of came out to be? There were some things that I was reading from like Name Magazine and all that. So I have an idea of possibly why this term came out, but what are your opinions on the origin of the word niche?
You guys have said that, and I was going to just defer to you guys because I really don't know where it came from. I probably just started using it because other people said it.
Yeah.
But when you brought up like how your fragrance journey came about, I pretty much was wearing one perfume and then I went into niche, older fragrance houses that only did fragrance. So it wasn't like I was wearing like department store perfumes and then all of a sudden like switched over. But I'm sure that is the journey for a lot of people. Is that how you guys discovered it?
I discovered it from, watching videos. The same as you. I know at the time I had a Mimo fragrance that I've been wearing for a long time, and I was like, oh, I just want to look up this perfume to see what it's about, and I watched a video on it, and that's what got me hooked, and then I discovered, oh wow, there's this thing called like designer and then niche, and I was like, okay, what is the difference? And then I run into this rabbit hole of trying to figure it out, and it just didn't make any sense to me, and that's how I found the term. I was doing some research, and I don't remember. I'm gonna have to look it up. But there was something about how it all started. I guess back in, in the 1900s. Sorry, early 2000s, maybe something regarding maybe by Redo. I don't know. I don't remember. I'll have to look and see. But if anyone knows, let us know.
Yeah, so Gunmetal brought up a point, and it kind of will lead into what I was going to share. So Gunmetal said, I think niche has a more clear-cut meaning long ago when there were far less brands. And I think that there's some truth to that. And from what I've read, and I'm not an expert by any means when it comes to this, but from the information I gathered, in the 1970s, that's when brands like Lactosun and Diptyque were starting to kind of come about, which was different from what came out before them with designer houses like Chanel and Dior. And with Diptyque, though, that's an interesting brand because they started off making candles. So they weren't, personal fragrances first, but they're still considered a niche brand today. And fast forward to later on into the 90s and 2000s, I think a lot more emphasis was put on these quote unquote niche brands because that's when blogging started. And there was now this interest in reviewing fragrances. And even though it's a very subjective thing, there are these bloggers that were sharing opinions on what is a good quality fragrance. And I think because of those type of critiques, there are some brands that were starting to pop up that wanted to kind of show a more artistic side of things, because what bloggers were sharing were similar to what critics of music and other forms of art were starting to share. So I think that's kind of how it kind of came about. so one could argue that when talking about how a fragrance smells, it's possible that there was a meaning behind that term niche because of the type of fragrances that were coming out, because it was different from what was being sold mainstream. But then later on, when there are more and more brands coming out, more and more niche and indie type of brands, the competition, I think, got really competitive. And when that happens, you want to sell as many fragrances as you can to earn a living, to make a living. And oftentimes that might contribute to some more mainstreaming smelling fragrances.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up blogging, because I think I had said to you when you first were talking about this on Instagram, like, I think proliferation of the internet has so much to do with this change.
Yeah.
I mean, before, I don't know if it was 70s or even before then, there was basically like huge houses like Chanel, which I guess you could say were like international. And then you had like neighborhood shops that were really just selling to their city. You didn't have small businesses with international reach. Just wasn't a thing. And now we have that with Instagram. And so we had picked some examples. I was talking about like Dusita. I thought that a lot of like people on YouTube or Instagram would be like, this is a niche house. But I was talking to a friend who's completely not in the fragrance world, not on the internet even. And he was telling me that his wife wears Glossier U and Dusita Isara. And I was like, oh,
yeah,
maybe it has a way bigger reach than I think, because now this is a mainstream thing. Everyone is a startup now. It's mainstream to be a startup because we have the internet. That kind of small business didn't really exist pre-internet.
That's so true. Yeah.
Eventually, this whole niche term could end up dissolving because, I mean, it's already started, you know, it's so what would that mean, say, I don't know, 3-4 years from now, where, because I mean, there's an oversaturation of niche houses, and, you know, just like you said, the more, you know, more people review products, the more people find out about them, the more they buy. It's the same thing that happens, you know, with any community. Eventually, whatever was considered niche wouldn't be so niche anymore. It would become, you know, more, I guess, mainstream.
Yeah. So I see Ritza had made a point about accessibility, and I'm guessing she's kind of referring to that definition of what niche would be.
Yeah.
Although I could think of a few.
Regarding
I have to think of all the ways that something could be niche to me, and accessibility was just one of them. Like, I feel like things can be niche in so many ways.
Which is actually changing, because I was on the Neiman Marcus website recently, and they have, I don't know where they carry these products, but they have a lot of, like, they have Inuit Nomad, they have things like Nasomato, and a bunch of other stuff that I just couldn't believe that they would carry. And that's Neiman Marcus. So if it's on their website, I'm sure they have it at some store somewhere. I don't know where, it's just not the one by me. So accessibility might be something that will be changing soon, because it will be more accessible in the future.
Yeah.
The more these bigger department stores start realizing this need, the more they would start carrying them, and then, you know, that would, you know, help dissolve that term niche, you know. So
yeah, and I think another point that I was reading from one of the sources is that with stores like Sephora and how fragrances were starting to be distributed, like, you know, starting in the 90s, early 2000s, how anyone could go into the store and just try something out for themselves. A lot of these designer fragrances now were more accessible to people to just try out. And I think that's what kind of led to that exclusivity of niche fragrances. But then when you look at how things are now, even Sephora is starting to, or they've been carrying a lot of these niche brands. So now when you think about accessibility, can you still consider those fragrances niche that are being sold in those stores?
Yeah, I wrote that in a little note when I was kind of just thinking about this topic. But if a niche brand, like those smaller green beauty brands that Sephora fragrance counter sells, is that really niche anymore? It's a Sephora, so it's almost like whether or not something is niche is outside of the intent of the brand. It's just like that can change depending on the size of your reach.
Yeah.
Right. I see Empty Sense agreed with the point that Michelle had made. Oh, wow. A lot of wonderful people here. Hi, guys. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Coming in late, but I like using high-end or luxury instead of niche.
I tend to use more, well, when it comes to my definition and how I define it, which is houses that don't make anything else other than perfumes, at least for now, which I've stopped using. But I, however, tend to use like independent, because there's a clear meaning to, indie houses. It's an independent. There's one person running the whole show. And then when it's whatever is the quote unquote niche perfumes, I usually don't like label it as such. I just don't really say much. I just call it perfume.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, it's very clear when something is an indie brand, and almost like an indie scent might not want to be niche, but it is just because of its scale.
Yeah. I see Rich Mitch made a point here. Department stores are dead. So are there fragrances that you think that don't fit the stereotypes for, I guess, designer or niche? I do have a few here, but I don't know if you two had also thought of some fragrances to share.
I mean, for me, it'll always be, Guerlain. Guerlain has great, especially their older stuff. Not like, I haven't honestly really been interested in anything that they've come out with recently, but a lot of their older fragrances, Jiki, for me specifically, Mitsuko, I love that fragrance. I guess that's one that you could consider quote unquote unique. And then, falling under that niche definition. And regarding like, niche houses that don't really satisfy, I guess, that need for being as unique and, super exclusive, Parfums de Mali comes to play. Maison Francine Kotchkin, they're all like just very, nice perfumes, but nothing special,
So do you mean like in terms of the scent and actual compositions, you feel like they're niche, like creative or challenging?
So if we're going with the definition of niche fragrances being unique, creative, those two houses I just mentioned don't necessarily fall under that bubble, even though they're specifically houses that only create perfumes, right? You don't, the perfumes are nice. They're very mass appealing, which tends to be the definition that you get with designer perfumes, right? Mass appealing, designer, more readily available, accessible, right? Those don't really, do much for me.
They could just be niche because they're just really expensive, and accessibility is
the accessibility
market, and that is a part of, the history of luxury products anyway. They're just out of people's budgets, so they're niche in that way.
Yeah, and also niche in the sense of, just creating just perfumes only, I guess, right? That's another definition that falls under that niche category.
I thought Rich probably put the point up. So he uses designer as a derogatory term. So it's funny because I never really saw that term as like a negative thing, at least when describing fragrances. And the way maybe how I define it might be different from a lot of people, but I just kind of considered a fragrance to be designer if it came from a house that was, considered to be a designer house. Like Chanel, they make designer clothing. But yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
What sense did you bring, Eve?
So, well, I guess we could talk about the designer one. So this is from Comme des Garçons, which is one of their incense fragrances. And I think, yeah, great minds think alike. Funny. So a lot of people, or some people, call this house niche, but I'm very familiar with the history of the house. They make clothing. They're known to make these really expensive pieces of clothing, but they are a designer house because they have a head creative director. So I always considered it to be designer, even though I think a lot of the scent profiles or the way they smell might be different from a lot of things you might find in Sephora, for example.
So I think of Comme des Garçons as niche if I were to have to choose one, because ever since just even their story, right, is not mass market, even though they have subsections now of their huge company that are definitely appeal to a more mass market. Like, I forgot what it's called, like the play, the little heart.
Yeah, the heart, yeah.
The heart stuff. I think it's called Comme des Garçons Play. And those clothing items are definitely appealing. They've entered the like younger market. They've entered like popular culture. So that subsection of the company, I think, would now be more mass market. But I don't think those people are necessarily buying the fragrances from Comme des Garçons. So in terms of fragrance line, I always consider it niche, not only because it's not so readily accessible, in many department stores. And even though there are a few that are sold at Nordstrom and stuff like that, and then their scent profiles are typically a little bit less accessible as well. And so in terms of those two definitions of niche, I kind of think of Comme des Garçons as niche, but I've never really thought of it as like a designer scent.
I think that's a good point, because I think where I bought this, it was from one of our local niche fragrance stores, where everything else in that store is from a niche brand. And then they have Comme des Garçons, so I think there is something to that for sure.
They do have one scent that smells a lot. Oh, I'm sorry, Michelle.
No, I was going to say, you don't find that. I don't think I've ever seen Comme des Garçons anywhere, like department stores. I've only seen them at stores that sell, quote unquote niche fragrances. So honestly, before I found out about Comme des Garçons, I would have thought that they were a niche brand. I didn't even know they were like a designer. Yeah, fashion house. Yeah.
Yeah. So Rich had mentioned about the last 10 years with designer brands. So I definitely get that, because I've been really frustrated as well with, especially when looking at the number of flankers that have been released by these big houses, and how not only that, but how very similar all these fragrances smell. But now I'm starting to see that trend in these houses that are considered to be niche by most people too. So there's that kind of change that's happening too.
And there's another reason why I felt like that term is just redundant, that it's just becoming oversaturated, and just more and more confusing to me.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's a new thing with oversaturation, expansion of fragrance market? Or do you think, I think you had said on Instagram that you had heard a perfumer say that, oh, you should look to the past if you want to see like more creative scents and stuff like that.
Yeah, it might be more recent. And part of that might just be because so many brands have been popping up. So with the competition and number of brands that exist, I think that's bound to happen. But yeah, I forget who said that quote. I was trying to look it up, but I couldn't find who said that quote. But someone had said something to the effect of, if you're looking at how fragrances are smelling like today, if you want to do something different or unique from what is being released today, it probably would be better to look at what the classics have done, because it was so vastly different from what we smell today.
Yeah, I think I kind of disagree with that, just because it's always easier. I think I said this to you on Instagram too, Eve, right? But like, in my opinion, that's good advice if a consumer is really interested in how a scent, like where the source of that scent was. A lot of scents are more derivative now. They're inspired by classics. And so if you're interested in that, and I tend to be someone who is, then that's good advice. But I don't necessarily think that inherently older scents were more creative, because it's always easier to be perceived as creative when the market is smaller, when there's less competition.
That's so
or
true.
The internet, where people aren't just voicing their opinions about your product. So it's not that people aren't creative today. It's just that older vintage scents, discontinued scents, have become a niche in themselves.
Because they're not accessible anymore, right? Because you can't, it's really hard to get those perfumes. And I feel like now, even more than ever, it's a lot harder to make something that's, I guess, truly, truly unique, right? Because there's just so many things out there. I
think you can make things that are unique, but you're just not going to sell it to everybody. Like, there are scents that don't even really smell traditionally perfumey, but there's a market for that. There's plenty of scents that people who, they're not really looking to smell good or pleasant. They're looking for something different. And I think that I'm more optimistic in terms of creativity in like scent, because you don't have to smell like a perfume. You can literally just smell like any natural scent. And that could be possible with synthetic ingredients and aroma chemicals now. That could be creative. That doesn't necessarily mean a lot of people are going to buy it, though. So you have to kind of temper your definition of what's creative with, it's not necessarily what's successful or what's mass appealing.
Yeah,
I guess that would be the question for the perfumer and the perfume house is, do I want something that would bring me lots of money, or do I want to create something because I enjoy this, or because I want to make money out of it? Do I want to make money out of this? Because essentially, I feel like if I were a perfumer and I was to create something, I would probably create something just out of this world that I don't like, probably something I wouldn't like, because that would be essentially some kind of exposure for you. I mean, think about, what was it? I guess Secretions Magnifique by
Italie Blanche.
It's something that intrigues people. It's not a perfume that you necessarily enjoy. Like, most people don't like it. However, it's a selling point to the house, right? It brings people in to see, okay, well, what has this house? What else have they made? They can make something that smells like crap, that, intentionally, by the way. Then they can probably make something that smells amazing, intentionally, that I would enjoy. So there's really no real answer to all of this. It's just always going to be an opinion, and a wonder to everyone.
Yeah, I know the three of us were chatting about this topic because I had shared an excerpt from what Francis Kershon had said, which is a brand, I think, that has become mainstream, even though a lot of people consider it to be niche. But we kind of got into that topic of, can someone produce something purely creative and not
like without compromise?
Without compromise, and still be able to sell it? Is it a bad thing to produce something that a lot of people will like? So it just brought up, I think, a lot of questions. So we could kind of talk about that, or whatever you want to share.
I know. I mean, there's specific houses that, and if I'm getting this correctly, that I guess they, like, for example, Frederick Mall, they let the perfumers do whatever they want with no like budget attached. Is that what you're asking?
Oh,
Like the budget-free perfumes where there's no budget attached to the creation of a perfume.
oh yeah, he's able to basically fund the perfumer and have them do what they want. At least that's what my impression is. I don't know if it is different behind the scenes.
Yeah, he said something in the article that you sent that like, I thought I was free when I thought I was free creatively, and then he had learned a lot, and it just seemed like he had a pretty cynical view about whether or not pure creativity could exist in a product on a shelf, a product that has gone through market testing, a product, that has been approved by the board of directors. He even said, right?
Yeah, the board.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of tend to agree with him, just because I think it is kind of a myth that great pieces of art in any industry have ever been separate from business and patronage when they're shared with the public to a certain scale. It's never, maybe not never, but there are many instances of art being commissioned by someone, and it's not purely the one artist's vision, right?
Yeah.
And so, especially when it is in a perfume, it has huge costs to make a perfume. The bigger a house is, the more upfront cost there's going to be, because their initial release is sure to be humongous. So that risk assessment is going to happen naturally. And I think when I was thinking about it, I tried to compare it to something like in film, where studios just like stopped taking risks and made a lot of sequels and stuff like that. It's kind of what we're seeing with a lot of bigger companies. But then there's always a chance for that to change, especially if consumers decide that they're bored and they want more. Something, a studio like Blumhouse, where they decided, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to take the risk, even though the profit margin is not going to be as good. And then they had some hits. And now I think that the big companies see that and see that, oh, it's actually worth it. There are people who really want this. And so I would say that that's why maybe we haven't seen it yet, but maybe bigger companies will kind of not split up, but they'll be more willing to invest in lines like privé lines or something like that take a little bit more risk or a little bit more expensive, but definitely, more niche than their mainstream offerings. I don't think they would ever give those up, but I think that they might have both.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And like you did with comparing it to another form of art, I think about even television shows that had the freedom to do more what they wanted to do. Like I know on AMC, when Mad Men and Breaking Bad came out, that was very different from what had come out previously. And the show creators were given a lot of liberty for what they can put on TV, and that ended up being a success. And I think that kind of signaled to other TV networks to allow these television show makers to put out something that they want to put out.
Yeah. So in regards to this, and then perfume houses that were, I guess, for example, Frederick Malle, who was on his own before Estee Lauder came up, acquired them. I'm not exactly sure if Estee Lauder would have a say over what they create, or if the house still has that independent, decision on what they put out there, So, just in relation to what we just talked about with film, do you think that Estee Lauder has a say over what they would put out, or do you think that they're just letting them do what they want to do?
I wonder if it's dependent on the house. I don't know how things have been with Frederick Malle. I haven't tried a lot of their newer releases, but I know they were bought out by Estee Lauder, so I don't know if they still have the liberty to do what they want to do. I don't know if
Right.
anyone knows that.
Yeah.
That's just part of their story, right? Like I've actually listened to a lot of interviews with Frederic Malle, and that's their main branding, that they give the perfumers this freedom. And I think Frederic Malle really prides himself on the fact that that's what he's selling.
Yeah.
But I think inevitably Estee Lauder definitely has a say over those things. I'm not sure, but I don't see why they wouldn't, because at the end of the day, with other industries, there's a lot of negotiation that happens between like a small section of a big company and then the like board or administration.
I guess a big company would acquire a smaller company because they're successful, right? So if everything that they're doing is working, so why would you change it? Like, why would you poke your nose into what they're doing after acquiring them? Why don't you just let them do what they want to do, right?
That would be ideal, but greed has no ceiling, you know?
That's true. Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
I did want to bring up this point. I know it was from a previous topic we were talking about, but so Amina was saying she agrees and disagrees. I think it was around that point around referring back to the past, I think. She said, I can see how modern perfume takes inspiration from vintage, but there are also some really cool, modern, more avant-garde fragrances out there with their own. Yeah.
That's another, I guess, category I was going to not talk about, but just mention is avant-garde. You know, something that's just super obscure that hasn't, that I haven't even seen I haven't tried every single vintage perfumes that's been out there, but just something that I wouldn't see being done in the past that's been done now with what's, coming out recently.
I dislike flankers a lot more than the whole lot of designers altogether. Yeah, I feel very strongly, even though I do own some flankers, but for the most part, I'm not very excited when I find out there's a flanker coming out.
To your point, Michelle, that you were talking about Estee Lauder and like smaller companies that they buy out. I've heard that Shiseido is really protective of Serge Lutens for like his creative.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Like that. So I've read things in the past about Serge Lutens because I'm just like I just have a lot of a sense, even if they're not one of my favorite houses now. In the past I've had a lot of them, so I've read a lot. And I have heard that in terms of a bigger company acquiring a smaller artist or something like that, that they tend to be protective of his license and stuff like that. And that's kind of
that makes more sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm actually not someone, like, my unpopular opinion is, and I'm not mad at the price hikes for these like bell jars and stuff like that, because it's better than them being discontinued.
That's true.
And like if niche means, okay, people who have this kind of money and want to exercise their status that way, then like at least it's available for the market that's there. And so there are maybe some companies that do see the value in that like hyper luxury or hyper exclusive market. Otherwise, why would you only sell something in a Paris boutique?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's true.
That's getting to like Hermes luxury that won't even sell bags to people who like have the money. They just
like to Oprah, for example.
Yeah, it's like, I'm sorry, you're just not our customer for whatever reason. It's not necessarily ethical. I'm just saying that in some ways, those companies can make these decisions for a variety of reasons, not just the bottom line.
Yeah, I didn't realize that whole thing about Shiseido being protective of his brand. It kind of makes sense if you look at what he has been releasing, even though they're not my favorites right now. But now it also made me realize the bottle changes is his idea. That it wasn't like a bigger brand telling him you should put him in these bottles that no one seems to really like.
There might be opinions. I'm sure there's like groups of people doing it. I don't think he is in Morocco just like thinking up every single thing that Christopher Charlotte is going to do. I think it's definitely more of a traditional business than we probably want to believe. But like, Yeah, I think that he does a lot of interviews where I feel like he stands behind his brand. So I also don't see a lot of differences between like the formulations and stuff like that. Although I think I was talking to Gunmetal on Instagram about how some of the newer ones, for some reason, the colors just change. Like the colors of the Serge Lutens fragrances and the black labels are sometimes completely different from before. So it's just like different dyes or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like I think I might have smelled Shen, a different formulation of it, or I don't remember. I guess they're two different ones. Not formulation wise, but one that was like exclusive to the boutique. I don't remember, but I smelled it against the one that you sent me, Eve, and I didn't notice the difference. Yeah. Apparently,
it smelled the same to me.
They do, yeah, they did smell the same. So,
I think
and I guess I'm one of the very few people that actually, I love the bell jars and I love the black bottles. So, and I like the other, the original bottles. So I'm not complaining about any one of them.
Yeah. I think with Shen, I think you're right. A lot of the ones I've compared to the older formulations, they haven't really changed. The thing with Shen I noticed though, and it could be because my bottle is newer, I think when looking at the older one, the juice color was different.
Does yours look like this?
So, well, mine's in the black bottle, but when I do decants for others, it looks more clear.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah, I don't know.
That could just be age too. I mean, it could just have changed because of that. But I'm literally talking like Feminité du Val used to be purple and now it's green. Like,
oh, that's interesting.
Like at Barney's, I would see it was green. So it was just confusing. But yeah, scent wise, I don't think there's a big enough difference for me that I would be like up in arms about it. I sometimes attribute that to just like batches or something like that too. I mean, it's not handmade, but materials aren't, they're not all the same every year, every time.
So Empty Sense brought up oh, sorry, were you going to say something, Michelle?
No. I was just reading the comments.
So Empty Sense said, make something that smells like tires or flowers from naturals. Would you take the financial risk? So I know Katie had brought up, she likes the smell of tires. So I was thinking about this point or something similar to this and kind of comparing it to the musicians I listen to. There's one, Charlie Parker, who is actually one of my husband's idols because he plays sax. And Charlie Parker was known to kind of put out these like out there music. He was part of the bebop movement, and a lot of people hated his music at first because no one could understand it. And it's kind of similar to how some of these brands are putting out these avant-garde type of fragrances. But then when he came out with this album where he had a string orchestra back his music, people saw that as him selling out because he was doing something more mainstream with the string orchestra. And he was playing standards that he didn't write himself. It was like these old standards that everyone knew the songs. So it kind of made me think about, is it a bad thing for someone to kind of put something out mainstream? In his case, to me, it is different from what some fragrance brands have done because you could still tell it was distinctly him when he's playing. He just happens to have this mainstream sounding thing. But he also had to earn a living. It was really hard, or it's still hard for musicians to make money. So you kind of have to strike that balance of, okay, how can I put out something that I love, but also make a living out of it? So it just got me thinking about that because I know I tend to go for the more somewhat avant-garde smelling things, but I also understand that's not something that a lot of people would buy.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought up music. And we're talking about film and music too.
Consumers influence everything, a lot of things, especially when it comes to earning a living as artists. Artists have to earn a living at some, eventually at some point, So I guess we tend to influence all of it, and which eventually would turn them into creating things that are more, appealing to most people. And can't blame them for it, really.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with something that's mass appealing too. I think that's like the flip side of is niche better designer, or for me, it's not a derogatory term because subjective, like I don't necessarily think that an artist puts something out just to pay the bills or something like that. I think that a person can have both. They can like something that is a little bit less challenging, just like people they like the Avengers sequels,
Yeah.
they like those. Do I like them? No, but do I think that obviously it's providing some value? It's just because I don't watch movies for the same reason as those people watch movies. And they can like both. It's not beyond someone to appreciate both mainstream, turn off your brain, watch some explosions, and then also watch something that makes you think. You just don't always have to be that way, like if we're going to talk about like useless labels, it's also useless to label people that way.
I agree 100%.
Right, yeah. And it also, artists are also influenced by a lot of things that they see. When we go out, when an artist is influenced by something and decides to create something, it's all, I'm sure, a combination of a lot of things that they've seen out and about, which would be, very specific things or very things that they've seen that's everywhere, I guess, quote unquote mainstream, all combined together to create something that's, interesting to them. So yeah. And I feel like a lot of times people feel like things that are mainstream are just, I guess, frowned upon. Maybe is that a thing? Because I have heard that before, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can like whatever you like, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I definitely have a mixture of both. Like if you look at my collection, there's definitely a lot of fragrances that smell mainstream, including ones from some obscure brands, but I also like the more artistic stuff. And sometimes it just depends on my mood. And
yeah, exactly. Depends on my mood. I don't have a specific preference to anything. Sometimes I would focus on exploring like a specific note. I usually go with notes. So if there's like a note I find more interesting, I would explore it. It doesn't matter where it comes from. Designer, niche, independent, artisan, wherever it comes from, I'll try it out. And it's just.
I talked to my husband about this topic like the other day, and he was just giving me his feedback on it. And he said something that's kind of related to this, that for him, creativity exists at the onset of some sort of entrepreneurial project. So it's kind of like like we can talk about perfume, but we can also talk about music because you brought it up, Eve. It's like when fans get really mad that an album comes out and it doesn't sound like the one before.
Yes.
You really like the creativity, or did you just like what you bought? Because now you're asking that person to just maintain a product and maintain a sound. Creation is new. It takes reinvention, and a person and an artist can maintain that, but it's often at the cost of people's opinions, because people and consumers are not as creative as the artists. They just like what they thought as creative in the context of that time and place. That changes over time. And then I think someone who's truly creative has to be detached from that people-pleasing kind of mentality.
Yes. Yeah.
Somewhat, right? Somewhat, not like entirely, right? Is that what you mean? Detached?
I think I guess to that point, I'm thinking about Weezer, so that band Weezer, and how I think that is a situation where, at least according to what I've heard, the band leader was obsessed with trying to please fans because they found out that one of the albums sold the most, so they tried to replicate that sound. But then other fans kind of saw that and said, "Well, you're losing what we liked the sound that we liked in the first place." And I think there's that obsession with trying to please people. And I don't think it was necessarily to sell things more. Maybe it is, but it really had to do with that popularity, I think.
I think anyone who puts something out to be shared to the public wants some sort of response from the public. So it might not be that they want everyone's response and they're not going to accept a mainstream response. I think of a book and some writer who was like appalled that his book got put on Oprah's favorite books list or something because he thought he was like better than that. But it's like, okay, well, you put something out there and people like it and you want to control who likes it. I think I was talking to someone about this. It was Pep from the Sentinel that once art leaves the artist, it's no longer the artist's thing, you know? So the creative process is really with the individual, and that process that happens before it's shared.
Yeah.
Other people don't get to decide what's creative or not. And I know that's kind of like a blow to people who review and stuff like that, but to me, criticizing something, reviewing something is not creating anything. It's really like, you might be helping someone that needs information, but oftentimes that kind of dialogue works against the creative process.
That's so true. Yeah.
I think Roja actually said something similar, that, you know, once the product's put out in the market, it's not really up to him anymore. It's up to the consumer who buys it, how people react to it. So
Ingmar Bergman says that about films too, that, like, you know, people misuse and misinterpret art all the time, but that's not the filmmaker's problem. But you can't be creative. You're a human in addition to an artist. You're going to be affected by those things if you choose to make that a part of your project, right? But that's why I tend to think that, you know, we have to kind of be a little bit nicer to people who are creating. Like, I know that a lot of people appreciate like negative reviews and stuff, and that's all good. Like, it can be helpful, but to what extent, you know, like, is it your job to hold these artists in, like, accountable? They're creating things. Are you creating anything? No, you're actually like creating this world that makes it really scary to put something out there.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah. And I think
unless you have like a specific kind of beef with the brand, then sure. But if I don't like something, I won't talk about it. Like, I would just let it go most of the time. I
try to make it a point of, you know, it's not according to my taste. Like, who am I to say that something is objectively bad? Like, I don't make perfumes. I know what I like, but I definitely don't know how to make one. And even with something like music, which is a huge part of my life, I have a hard time even saying, you know, this album's bad or whatnot. It makes me think about Thelonious Monk, who's one of my favorite composers, and how, in my opinion, I think he's a genius. And a lot of his peers thought that way too. And he's one of the most creative composers, but then he had so many bad reviews of his compositions. Like, people hated him because they couldn't understand it. So when I learned about that, it also kind of made me question.
Things that were hated in the past might be loved later by people.
Yeah.
So it's really irrelevant.
That's true.
I feel like as consumers, we should not forget the creative process of everything put out there. Like, there's blood, sweat, and everything put out into a product, and we have to remember that and take that into consideration when we say things about products. Like you said, Eve, like, the things you like, the stuff that you may not like, I might like, because and that's why I love negative reviews too, because someone might not like something about something, but however, that's something that I tend to enjoy, and I would check it out. So and then we come back to the point where I guess a negative review isn't always a negative review. It's probably, it might catch someone else's attention.
Yeah. I did want to do a quick time check. I'm okay on time, but I also want to be respectful of your time too.
Oh wow, I can't believe we've been talking for an hour.
Yeah, for an hour.
And I feel like we kind of like detached from
I know. Are we still talking about niche? I'm fine with time.
You're fine. Okay. How about you, Michelle? No pressure.
I'm fine, yeah.
Okay. All right. I figured, we're kind of in the groove of things, so we could keep going. I did want to ask Brandon about this Avengers fragrance. Does that actually exist? I don't know if I'll try it, but I'm curious about it.
I think there's this sentiment out there that, okay, if something is mainstream and it's derivative, then we just actually don't need it on the market anymore because there's too many. That's definitely a valid concern. That's why I appreciate reviews that really describe what this scent is in the context of the market. So let's talk about like Tom Ford, for example, because there's been a lot of buzz about like him selling out, or maybe he was always a sellout, like he's a huge brand. And these bottles that he's selling like kids basically for $350. I have ethical concerns about that, but would I say that it smells bad? No, because obviously a lot of people like it. But I would be willing to say that I don't think it's worth the price, because I've smelled something really similar at this price point that is objectively cheaper, like a Bath and Body Works scent.
just put it out there.
Just putting it out there. But I'm not going to say it's bad, because people don't buy things just for the scent. Like, it's just, if you're buying Tom Ford, you're not buying just for the scent. And if you are, I think it's valid for a reviewer to say, okay, well, if you're only buying for the scent, it's not, I don't think it's worth the money. The Tom Ford ingredients could be expensive. I don't know the prices of ingredients that he used. But if the compositional result is the same as this other like $5 scent, then like, I'm just saying that that's the part that doesn't match up to me. But if you want to buy a Tom Ford perfume for the bottle, if you want to buy it for the status, go for it. I mean, like, you just have to be aware of what you're buying,
That's true.
Again, no one out there is going to know what you're wearing. Like, no one's going to know how much the perfume you're wearing is. If you're buying a perfume for the status or for the name, no one would know.
Yeah, and that's where my ethical concerns come in, because kids don't have a responsibility to like know the history of this thing. And I think it's ridiculous that, like, can you imagine just thinking that you can only fit in because you have a $350 perfume? That's absolutely ridiculous to me. So it's not that I want everyone to do positive reviews. I just want more nuance in what are the reasons why people buy anything in a commercial space, and why would you want to buy something? I think that element of consumerism is really missing, and reviewers have a role to play in that. It's not to say things are good or bad. It's to put them in a context, because you are, as a reviewer, someone who has more knowledge about the market and other products because you smelled a lot.
Yeah. Very good points.
I'm reading some of these comments now, like, office for men smells like SpongeBob SquarePants.
What does SpongeBob
What does that smell like? What does Bikini Bottom smell like?
Oh, what was that? I didn't quite hear it.
Like, Office for Men smells like SpongeBob SquarePants? Is that what you said?
That's what somebody said.
I can't say because I haven't smelled that.
There's something about that here.
All right, Gunmetal agreed with you, Vivi.
Like, knowledge to place it. Yeah, I don't have that knowledge, Gunmetal. So what are you trying to say?
Well, I'm not saying I do either, and I'm definitely not above all of anything that I'm saying. Like, everyone's human. I forgive everybody, but like, I don't call myself a reviewer because I don't talk about how something smells. I talk about my personal experience with it, and oftentimes I'm so flowery that, like, I hope that you're not thinking that when you smell this, it's going to smell like my childhood. Like, it's not going to smell like that to you. That's just, I'm sharing because of some need to share from my own kingdom of experience. Like it's completely unrelated to reviewing.
I could just imagine someone trying to return Fiona like try to search a tone fragrance. This does not smell like Christmas with my family.
Yeah, I'm like, sorry.
I mean, that's and so when people say this smells like Christmas, I'm from Nigeria. I spent most of my life in Nigeria. I haven't been in America for like half of my lifetime. And my Christmas back home did not smell like the Christmas here. So, and I still haven't gotten used to that scent profile, I guess. So when people say things smell like Christmas and all of that stuff, I'm just like
what are you talking about?
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
So
I have a perfume that totally to talk about that. It can bring us back to niche because okay. I brought a Santa Maria Novella scent, and I would say that I don't know if people would consider this niche, like YouTube niche, but it's not as accessible in the United States as it would be in other parts of the world, right? But I have a friend who was born in Italy, and this was like the scent of her childhood. So for her, this isn't niche. And then when I lived in Japan, these are completely available. Yeah. They're so popular, and they're in like the equivalent of Nordstrom and Macy's and Neiman Marcus. So niche is also, it's a story that could be sold to you and then completely turned in another market. Like we are only talking about the United States, like Western market here. Yeah. And then we're not really aware of how a fragrance from the same company might be marketed to the Middle East or something like that. Those are all very intentional decisions from a brand.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, the Santa Maria Novella, because there are some, I guess, Instagram accounts that I follow based in Japan, and all of them pretty much have that brand in their collection. But wow. As you said, that's so hard to find, or at least where I live, that's so hard to find in store.
I haven't seen that until you and Vivi talked about it, that fragrance. And I don't know who sells it around here, but
Lucky Scent has a lot now, which I think that like most people in the fragrance community can buy things from Lucky Scent. And I'm pretty sure they ship like to different countries and stuff like that too, right? So,
they do. I think though, for some reason, I don't know why, but when that brand is sold online, they don't let you purchase it on the website. It always says call the store for a bottle. I don't know why.
How interesting. Yeah, I live relatively close to the Lucky Scent, like scent bar boutique.
Do they have it?
They have it in store. Yeah, they have it in store. And they don't have all of them because I've been to the Florence, like the original store in Florence, and they have a ton. I've never seen all of them in the US. But I think in Europe, they have stores. And like I said, in Japan, when I was there, it's in the department stores. And there's like a huge section in the department store for Santa Maria Novella.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. You know what else? Lucky Scent, last time I was there, the owner, Steve, told me that like my sister, I took my sister there, and she likes pretty like mainstream scents, just unabashedly. She wants compliments. And she wanted a sample of a Le Labo scent, and they said that she couldn't have one. Like they were like, I'm sorry, we're not allowed to make samples of that. And they will usually make samples of anything, even if it's really expensive. When you go into the store, they'll just give you free samples. And I think it just must be the contracts that they have with the stores, because Le Labo sells their samples in their boutiques. So their freestanding boutiques, you have to pay like $6 or $7 for a sample. So they don't want their things like available. However, there's a Le Labo counter at Nordstrom, and Nordstrom will make samples for your Le Labo. So is it just different contracts? I don't know.
The Nordstrom's Le Labo counter here in Austin don't do samples. But if I have a friend that works in the perfume area, And if there's no reliable person there, she'll give me a sample. So that's interesting though.
Yeah, just the fact that there are some people that say we can't must mean that like there are some brands, and we see it with Chanel, we see it with smaller brands too, I guess, that just want more control over like this distribution, I guess. It's because they want to maintain that exclusivity.
One question I do have on here, and we kind of touched upon it, is why do you think there is this, for lack of a better word, obsession with wanting niche fragrances? Like we see some videos that cover topics like, you know, best gateway niche brands, or there are some people who consider themselves to be niche snobs. Why do you think there is this high interest in what we call niche fragrances?
I forgot about that term, niche snob.
Oh.
But that's a really good question.
Yeah, the audience can answer. I have no idea. I don't know.
I think
actually
the obsession is probably intentional, like, and the brands they're pushing like influencers to market them as such. So that the part of that could be just like an illusion. But then at the same time, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. That's fine. Go ahead. Finish.
I was going to say at the same time, I think that it's also really natural for people to want, there's this misconception that if you like something that's unpopular or hipster, then like it's better somehow. So that kind of pseudo hipsterdom is just like part of human nature. If you want to stand out, you can't be doing everything mindlessly and same as everyone else. And trying to be cultured in a sense is just a different version of that. I mean, I'm not above it for sure.
So speaking to your point, Viv, I was going to say, it was actually one of the notes, something I wrote down. It might be intentional because every single time I watch it, because I actually went back and watched a few of those videos today, and there's a very the brands mentioned are very similar. It's practically the same. So it could be you know, like I said, niche is a selling point, right? That's what people are throwing out there as, you know, to sell their product. And like Katie is saying here, I feel like the people who are, I guess, super obsessed with that term or wanting, I guess, a niche fragrance, there's like a status attached to all of it. It's like a flex. Like, I mean, that's the
I agree with you.
Flex.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think there is that that thought about status, so I think that is part of it. I know Time to Musk Up asked, does that include higher end designer? I think that's interesting because I think there are some niche snobs that would include that as part of that category, and I think they might try to reach or expand their definition because they realize, oh, I like this stuff too. I'm going to put that as part of that definition too. But as Katie mentions here, when it comes to clothing, like Chanel clothing, for example, that does seem to be more exclusive. And from what I've seen, I think a lot of people who are into the more luxurious type of clothing and accessories are oftentimes also trying to chase after the really expensive niche luxury lines.
That is a really good point that Katie made, because it's kind of ironic also in the sense that a fashion house like, I don't know, let's just take like Gucci. The Gucci fragrances make more of the overall bottom line for Gucci Incorporated than the actual like haute couture pieces or the runway pieces. Like there's actually a very small number of like super rich people who can afford those pieces, and oftentimes they're bespoke and like tailored to their like needs after the runway show. I would say that a lot of designers, like the artistic directors of design houses, they would probably say that that's where their creativity lies, and all fragrances that they put out are really like where they're trying to just stay afloat.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So Amina said, I don't like the term niche snob. It's funny. I have been called that a few times because I have talked about niche fragrances on my channel. Though I know both of you know that I do like designer fragrances too. I guess maybe what are your thoughts on that? So
On niche snob?
well, more like people who might be partial to maybe more affordable fragrances. They call out certain people for liking niche fragrances. I don't know.
Oh, well, I'm just like, I'm against anyone calling anyone out, but I think that's kind of an unpopular opinion these days. I think it's like, I'm just afraid to call anyone out.
Yeah.
I just don't like it. I mean, I just don't like, I'm okay with saying I don't like a scent, but that's not an attack on anybody. Like,
Exactly.
I find it really just too cruel to like make fun of people and like stuff like that, especially if they're like putting themselves out there on the internet and stuff, and maybe like in private, but on a video, I don't think I would do that. And if I have, then I'm just a hypocrite.
I don't think you have. I have not seen that for sure. But I definitely agree. I don't see the value in attacking someone personally with like their tastes. As you had mentioned, we just have different tastes with what we like and all that. And I could maybe criticize a perfume and say how it doesn't work for me, but I don't think I would be comfortable ever saying that someone is dumb or whatever word for liking a certain scent.
I also don't hear a lot of people, I don't think it's a derogatory term to call someone a niche snob. I've heard people call themselves that. And I think it's because you want to be someone who stands out and has like cultured taste and unique taste. I think that, you know, that's just part of human nature too. Like, especially for anyone who is putting themselves out there and their opinion, they obviously think that it's a valuable opinion. And if it was just everyone's opinion, it wouldn't be valuable.
Yeah.
So it's like a kind of a self-deprecating compliment to yourself if you say that, like, oh, well, I kind of have niche taste and stuff like that. But everyone does. Like, everyone has a personal experience with fragrance. So if we're saying that the word niche doesn't really mean anything inherently, that it kind of holds zero information, then niche snob also doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a blanket term, term for how you define someone. And like you said, this doesn't mean we all have different preferences. Like, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to the food that we like to eat, when it comes to what we like to wear, how we like to present ourselves, it's all dependent on our experiences, on how we were brought up, and on not just that, on so many other things. Like my preference in perfume has changed in the last year only, and it just keeps changing. It changes just based on what I want to explore, and there's nothing wrong with liking specific kinds of things. And I feel like usually when I see statements like what Amina just said, people calling, having this, I guess, people define snob as a negative term. Actually, most people do. So yeah, it is, calling someone a niche snob is, I guess, mostly seen as negative. Some people may not see it as that, but that is normally the case. Mm-hmm. And that's not the right thing to do, to call someone out just based on what they like.
Yeah. Amina brings up a good point here. I think a lot of people do tend to think there is this blueprint of how our journey starts off and where we end up heading. I think about my husband, who wasn't really into fragrances until we met. And I would say he got into both designer and even some indie stuff at the same time because of what I would introduce to him. So I think that blueprint that most people think of isn't necessarily true for some cases.
I mean, it does reflect in the videos that you see, for the most part. I mean, when I first started watching YouTube videos, I would see, oh, beginner fragrances and things like that, and it followed that blueprint or flow chart that Amina seems to refer to, and but that does influence a lot of people, though, because they watch it and they see that. But not a lot of people, because I didn't start off watching YouTube videos. I started off watching, buying what I liked, and then one day, just out of nowhere, I decided, oh, let me just look up this one perfume, and then that's where it all started. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. Yeah, I can see that being a thing.
Yeah. So Katie says, I think everyone likes what they like. It's just maybe organic development that at some point you start looking for other things than interchangeable designer options.
Yeah, that's just a part of learning to love anything, right? Like if you like music, you're not only going to listen to the radio. Like if you like perfume, you're going to look for more things. And that for me, since I've been into perfume for a while, has manifested in so many different ways, not only in the accessibility of fragrances, but also the format of them. Like I started looking into solid perfumes and room fragrance or whatever, and different bath and body products. I mean, it's just a natural progression. I don't think a blueprint doesn't make sense for sure, because it really depends on why you connected with something. Some people might love perfume because of the community. And so their journey tends to be more driven by what people are saying about it. And that's fine. It's just, you can't, everyone connects to things for different reasons.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's like a general consensus here that I think a lot of people tend to be pretty disappointed with what has been released by quite a few designer houses lately.
Yeah, I think what's also disappointing is that the more affordable, or like the mainly affordable ones, tend to be the ones that smell a little bit more generic.
Yeah.
And then if you are appreciating perfume, you're kind of expected to pay more for it now. Whether that be in like, okay, pay for these samples because you can't find them anywhere, or pay because they're actually just priced very high.
Yeah.
But perfume in itself is already a luxury product. So this is like, it's kind of expected to me. I think like as the market grows, the luxury market will want to maintain its like exclusivity. And that means that, okay, well, if we're going to make Tom Ford Signature, then we're also going to make Tom Ford Private Blend, and these flacons are like $800. And like, if you're really into niche, then if you're into niche for niche sake, then you're going to have to pay for it. And I think that that's a little bit disappointing, because it kind of forces people in certain demographics to buy either indie or with privé, and then that just is like polarization in another, like, way more sinister way.
Yeah.
So what would you say about the association of niche perfumes being more expensive than the rest? What do you have to say about that? Is that always true though? Because I feel like it's been presented that way, but is it always true? If we look at, niche fragrances as what people have described it to be or defined it as, is it always true that niche perfumes are always more expensive than, I guess, quote unquote, designer perfumes? I don't think it is.
Yeah, I don't think it's always true. I think a lot of people would say it's true though, because of how they would define niche, especially if they're looking for something more exclusive. And oftentimes if they're looking for exclusivity, it is more expensive. But I don't necessarily think that to be true, because I could think of a few brands where, if we're looking at especially that definition of a brand only selling fragrances, like that, they're not always the most expensive.
Right.
Yeah, and even if we look at accessibility, we said that indie perfumes are just inherently niche because of their scale. And not all indies are super expensive. So I think that it's unfortunate that that's being a trend that's being marketed so heavily on the internet. But yeah, you can always find things that are niche. And I tend to be kind of optimistic about that, because I am someone who likes to find discontinued scents and different things, and sometimes for the sake of being different. I'm not someone who says oh, I just like this for the smell, because I just know myself. I'm not. I definitely experience it way more subjectively and as a whole story. I get really emotionally attached to things, and if somebody likes something, then I might like it as a point of connection. And yeah, I don't think that has to be that's not an expensive process. I do a lot of secondhand shopping and stuff like that, and I enjoy that process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we're thinking about how expensive that things have gotten, one thing that does make me kind of upset is when these really expensive niche houses produce fragrances that, I mean, they're not necessarily clones of things, but they're so similar to something that can be sold more inexpensively. And I think when that happens, and they try to promote how higher quality their ingredients might be and things like that. But to me, I also want to pay for the creativity behind a scent. And I think that's one piece that does kind of irk me when I see some of these really expensive luxury houses producing things that are very similar to things we've smelled before.
Yeah, it's just a flagrant money grab if it really smells exactly like something else and you're really just paying for the exclusivity. That kind of sucks. But I think Gunmetal brought up a good point in the chat that, yeah, this thing that that for a smaller brand, their upfront costs are going to be humongous and their profit margin is just not going to be as high. So if we want to support niche, then that's what it takes in this market, because when a big company makes a product, they're not going to be as incentivized to make something that's niche, because they have a sure market in something that's generic.
But some niche houses are not quite small. Some of them are actually pretty big. So, I guess the distinguishing factor here is niche and indie, because I guess most indie houses would be niche, right? However, independent houses are a lot smaller than most niche houses.
That's a really good point, Michelle, because I mean, it's hard to talk about it because we say that niche doesn't mean anything, and then we
and then we go back.
Then we use it. Then we use it to talk about another topic. But yeah, Diptyque, for example, is a house that has international reach, and it would be disappointing, I think, to Eve's point, if they put out something that was I guess, a clone. I think that it's pretty hard to some people don't want to go back and smell something that's old. They don't want to go back and find something that's discontinued. So there's a lot of people that say Diptyque Eau Capitale smells a lot like Portrait of a Lady, right? It's not a clone, I would say. I have smelled both of them, but is it derivative? To a certain extent, because maybe Portrait of a Lady was more creative in its time. But is everybody, it's just as the market grows, you're either going to buy something for a variety of reasons. Some people can't afford or they don't want to buy $350 bottles. So get Eau Capitale. It's not a bad idea.
Right.
Yeah. Very good point.
Are we gonna talk about clone houses then?
We can if you want. Before we get into that, though, Julia did bring up a really good comment. I did want to show this. So Julia said, I wish niche houses would be more transparent on where they source their materials and if those materials are sustainable or not, especially using naturals. That's a really good point. I know there's this obsession from these clean brands to give us more natural ingredients, but I think oftentimes they don't think about the repercussions that might have, or also just how vague clean is, that term is. But I think this is a really good point. I do want to wear something with high quality ingredients, but at the same time, and I think, Michelle, you and I have talked about this too, of how important it is to think about the impact it has on the environment.
Yeah, because I mean, extraction, right? Extracting all these natural ingredients they do impact the environment, and it's important that we consider that when we look at the perfumes. You know, a lot of people are, mostly into naturals, which that's cool, yeah, but I do pay more attention to sustainability and impact than what, as long as it smells good. It could, anything synthetics could smell just as good as naturals. I mean, there's so many creative synthetic usage of perfumes. I mean, one of the perfumes I actually just smelled recently is Mabette by Iris Perfumes, and I just found out that the animalic note they used in it is synthetic, and that's a great example of how amazing a synthetic note could be used. And it's not just about the naturals, it's also about sustainability, and that's one thing that we should be paying attention to as well when it comes to perfumes.
Right, and I know Time to Muscat brought up this point. Yeah, so it's funny because that I could see the appeal of this house, Fragrance du Bois. That is a house that I think I probably won't purchase from. I have no interest in it, and part of that is I don't have an interest in wearing real oud. That's not something that I seek out. I mean, there are also some other issues with that house that I could have a problem with, but I could see the appeal of it to a lot of customers.
I've smelled a few things from Fragrance du Bois, and nothing has it just no interest. That's all I'm gonna say.
So I know you wanted to mention clone houses.
Oh yeah, I'm not experienced. Well, I think I have smelled one clone perfume, but I haven't formed an opinion on clone houses because I don't have much experience. I've only had one experience with them. So I'm curious to know what you guys have to say and what the audience has to say about them.
I agree with what Rich Mitch said, that like I tend to be someone who really values vintage designer sense. It's just like a fun part of the hobby for me. And in many ways, clone houses could have the potential to like fill this void for a lot of people, right? Because not everyone has the time or money to like, and there's just not even enough like availability for this to become like a big niche for some people who really care about it. So that would be cool if like someone could recreate a vintage designer scent. But from what I've been seeing, I guess I don't think that's really what clone houses do, right? So they're not doing that, but they could.
Right.
Yeah, I think that could be something they could do.
Yeah, so most clone houses I've seen are recreating very popular perfumes, Baccarat Rouge, Creed Aventus, that kind of stuff. So there hasn't been that interest in them for me per se.
I think there was, I don't know which house it is or what brand it is. There is a clone brand that I think produced some discontinued fragrances, but they're fragrances that were discontinued pretty recently. So they're ones that are still kind of popular with a lot of people. So I think there is that interest. I don't know if there is an interest now or like a widespread interest in recreating the old or vintage designer scents that were discontinued.
I would think that wouldn't be profitable for a brand right now. Like, I don't see a lot of people like doing that because it's only a small part of the small fragrance community on the internet. So like, I can't see why a brand would like be able to really make a business out of that. But the fact that they are just like making cheaper versions of what's already on the market, yeah, it's kind of like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just like, it's almost like, it's like shameless, but a lot of brands do it and don't call themselves clones.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so is it really like, it's just a shameless version of something that a lot of people are doing? Like, in all of art, people steal.
So if we talk about, and I think I've talked about this before, Bodecia, the Victorias, and just because they make their perfumes more expensive, but people don't really notice that a lot of the things that they are making are very similar to a lot of the things that are being made right now currently. However, I guess the other clone houses that create perfumes but make them cheaper are called out on that. So what would you guys say about that? I think Tiziana Terenzi is another house that kind of like does the same thing. Who else? I don't remember. But because the perfume is more expensive, I guess we tend to not call them out for whatever reason.
Yeah. So it's hard, right? Because there isn't really a copyright law with smells or with fragrances right now, at least in this point of time. So it's hard to call that out. For me, I do find it to be more respectful for a brand to say they were inspired by the specific scent rather than putting out something that smells blatantly similar to something else without crediting it. But I think this also kind of brings into question, at what point is a fragrance created because they're following a trend versus actually copying something? I know in the music world, that is something that some artists have been running into. There are some copyright lawsuits that have happened. Even though if you look at some of the things that they are being sued for, it's kind of like chord progressions and things that have been in a lot of songs in the past. It's not just because of this one song. So it's going to be hard to kind of make that distinction if there ever is a copyright law that develops for fragrances.
Yeah, especially with fragrances, it's a different kind of beast. You cannot. It would be really hard to create some kind of like copyright law on that. I guess packaging, yes, and name, right? But smell.
I think we're going to see a lot of this because as more everyday people start to get into scent, they get into it, they start their YouTube brand, they start their Kickstarter, and it's because they are inspired by perfume. And so they're going to want to make a perfume that they love, and that is inevitably going to be derivative of some scent from something that they've smelled. Like, a lot of these people aren't trained. They're not smelling like raw materials and then like thinking about, I couldn't do that. So if I were to make a scent that I like, it probably smell like something that I smelled before and maybe like tweak it a little bit. Yeah. And the more, I don't know what the word is, like the more consumers get to participate in the creation of the product, the more all those lines are going to get blurred.
Yeah, I think about Madonna's Truth or Dare, right? Because that was inspired by Furca, because that was a smell that she had grown up with. So that is very similar to what we are seeing with influencers coming out with their own fragrances. They are producing things that they enjoy.
And just tweaking it a little bit. It's like,
yeah. Or they're just choosing. So like oftentimes progress in one area is going to mean sacrifice in another area, right? Like Furca is, maybe it's different now, it's changed. And I have like different versions of Furca, so I know that it has changed a lot. Mm-hmm. And so if you want something to smell like old Furca, and you also want it to be cheap and to like be a celebrity scent to sell to your market, then you're already making, like the creators are aware that they're making these sacrifices. I think calling something like a clone or something like that is like a totally different conversation, right? Because that gets into like who owns the scent, or what part of the fragrance do you own? Like, do you own the combination of oud and rose? I don't know. I don't think anyone can really own that.
See, that's the problem that is coming up in the music world, because a lot of things that people are getting sued for are these, I think, foundational things that are part of a lot of pieces of music. And yeah, I don't know how that's going to look like with fragrances.
I can only see it getting just more case by case.
Yeah.
And when things get into like the legal system, it is case by case. Like, it kind of depends on the argument and the situation, right? Like, there might be a precedent set, I guess, but that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, Amina brought up a video from Equality Fragrance. I did see that video, and I was thinking about that one when I was talking about that point, because he did call out an expensive ink brand for basically putting out something that was like a clone of another fragrance, but it wasn't advertising itself that way.
Yeah. I tend to think that that's super dishonest too. Like, I agree with what Eve said, but I know that there are some people who wouldn't care, because I know people who just want something because of the thing and the status it represents. And they would outright say that, oh, I'm not really looking for originality. That's not why I buy things.
Yeah.
Right. Bro.
Let's see. Do you guys want to wrap it up in about 10 minutes? Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. I think Gunmetal's saying Roja Dove equals skill on. Diaghilev, it's Mitsuko on. Right. So
I've never smelled anything from Roja, so I don't know. I also think that it's probably more of a thing on the internet than I'm even aware of, like this obsession with Roja Dove.
I have not tried a lot.
Yes. So I was in Houston, I think 2 weeks ago, and I met up with Amina, and we were able to get to Neiman Marcus like 15 minutes before they closed, and we went to the Roja counter. And we both wanted to smell Chypre Extraordinaire. Smelled it, it was like, oh, really? Seriously? I don't remember how much that perfume is. I think close to $2,000. And initially it was just underwhelming, and I was just not interested. So I asked for them to spray it on my hand. They sprayed it on my hand and on a paper. And on our way out, I smelled it again. And it smelled exactly like Etruscan Water by Francesca Bianchi. And Amina and I were just completely baffled. So now, here's the thing though, which I looked it up. Francesca Bianchi came out in 2019. Chypre Extraordinaire came out in 2018. I don't know what that means. However, to me, it means that there's just no reason for that perfume to cost that much. That's what that meant to me. And I could not believe how similar they smelled. Like, I would not be able to tell the difference. That's how close it was.
Yeah. That's, I mean, I think that this is getting at the heart of what we're saying, that consumers really have to be aware of why they buy stuff. And they have to also be aware of, like, there are things out there that are going to be selling to you for some reason, but it's not actually true. And those companies that make huge, like, Swarovski crystal bottles for thousands of dollars, they're probably not selling to us, you know? They probably are selling to people who care about those kind of things. And I think it gets a little bit cloudy when reviewers are like, oh, this is such a great quality scent or something like that, without kind of mentioning and maybe because they don't know that it's similar to this indie scent or something like that.
So that brings
starts
me
to get hard. Yeah.
That brings me to a question. Who's buying this perfume? Because I have a lot, I mean, I don't have a lot of wealthy friends, but from, you know, I know some people who are very wealthy, and they wear just the most normal perfumes. Like, they don't know who Roja is, or Bodicia or any of these other people. They just know what they see when they go out to the store here. So who's buying it? And how are they making money to stay around? I'm curious about that. When it comes to Roger Parfum, I guess the profit margin on his perfumes is probably really high, right? Because
they don't have to sell that much to like stay afloat.
Exactly,
probably.
to make money. But yeah, I don't know. I just always wondered about that.
I think people who it's like people who buy Maseratis or like Lamborghini, like they're buying it for the status. They would probably not say it to your face, but like they're buying it for that, and they want the status associated with that. We all do it. We all do things for status. It's just that some people, I think I mentioned before, want to exercise that status through material things. And some people, maybe because they don't have the means, or just maybe because they don't value that. Because just because someone doesn't buy that stuff doesn't mean they're not wealthy. Like you said with your friends, like just because someone is a multimillionaire doesn't mean that they spend that way, like in the I don't know, TV sense of the word. So there's just there's definitely a market for it, and I think the key to them actually staying in business is that the parfum market is really big.
Yeah.
There's a Beverly Hills boutique called Beverly Hills Perfumer or something, and they carry all of the Roja fragrances. And they've been there for a while. So I'm pretty sure people are buying it because he gets like international customers and stuff like that, and people who come to Beverly Hills, it's on Rodeo Drive. So they're there. They're just not on the internet, and we don't hear about them.
I think these perfumes are probably strategically placed, right? Because when it comes to visibility and just knowing what's out there, like for example, we don't have stuff like that here in Austin, Texas, but it's available in specific places where we know that people would see it. People who have the means to buy it would see it, and they'll tell their friends about it. And like you said, they don't have to sell that much to make money. Like one perfume will probably pay their car note or whatever.
Or it could be like one client. It could be one client who just comes and buys like a bunch. So it doesn't even have to be one perfume. It's just one obsessed person that
maybe it's been buying all of the Rojas.
He's keeping the company afloat.
Although Gunmetal said this, I believe most people get the Rojas from fragrance buy.
Okay, so I think that is like more of an ethical concern for me, because when people are doing that and then pretending that they bought it at a certain price and then marketing to like young people who think that they have to do that to be cool, it's like, that's like immoral to me, because that's lying. Like you actually you didn't buy that like full price. You just want it. And that's like, most people don't know that. And that's crazy.
That's a really good point.
I'm starting to stumble over my words because we've been talking for so long.
He says, "I'm starting you through." No, I don't think we are.
No.
I for sure am not.
I'm not getting sponsorships from anyone at all. Not now, not anytime in the future at all. I guess just throwing it out there.
I've actually stopped like really watching reviews, because even like, and this is no offense to anybody, but I have a lot of perfume that I've already had a relationship with. And then when I started listening to people, I felt myself like getting, like my perception of my own perfume collection changed a little bit. And that kind of freaks me out. Like things, I was like, because I'm human, like if somebody says something smells gross, I'm like, wait, oh my gosh, I never noticed this like before. And I'm not like a professional. So then I'm like, oh crap, I like ruined it for myself by watching this video. So really, I just am going back to the way I started, which is like kind of tuning everybody out and doing things without sharing and without really getting other people's opinions, because I am affected by other people's opinions.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I know, and I do try to catch myself too when people say, oh no, I didn't like this. And I'm like, I love that perfume. But I'm like, you know what? I don't care what you think though, because I like it and that's all that matters. So yeah, I can see how it could get that way.
But it's not like I care that people don't like things, because I tend to be kind of contrarian and I like things just because they're like different. But I know it says if you tell me that you smell like something super animalic or dirty, and I never noticed that before. I think you guys know like what scent I'm talking about here because you guys were on a live where said something about a perfume that was like, oh my gosh, I never thought of that as super animalic. But the more I hear about it from people that I trust and have relationships with and are friends with, I'm like, oh my God, I never noticed this. Is it going to ruin it for me now? Like, and then, you know, because there's like the power of suggestion in a sense where you're like, oh, you know, there's popcorn in this. And then you're like, oh yeah, I smell popcorn.
Confirmation bias, right?
Exactly. It's just like, I think that's just human nature. I don't think that that's like, it's not insecurity. It's just like, oh, I never really thought of it that way. It's like, oh, I mean, I'm going to say this and maybe ruin something for someone else, but Tom Ford's Soleil, what is that, like rose gold one?
Oh,
Soleil.
Orchid Soleil. So some people for Fragrantica were saying like, I thought it was hilarious when I read this. It was like a bunch of people thought it smelled like corn tortillas.
That's what it smells like.
And then I was like, oh no, it does. Like, luckily, I like the smell of corn tortillas. But now that's all I can smell. Like ever since someone said that, my husband has done it to me. So it's not like, it's not malicious. It's just like if someone says something smells like a trash bag, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, they do smell like our trash bags. Then that's implanted in my memory. I can't forget it.
Yeah, that happens a lot with my husband.
Yeah, you can't forget it. And for me, who hasn't smelled that perfume, I'll probably smell it thinking about corn tortillas. Yeah. It's just natural. There's nothing, there's no way to escape that.
Yeah. I just don't like it when it happens for things that I already have. Because I'm like, oh, maybe if I had this experience when I was just sampling it, then I wouldn't have purchased it. But I don't mind too much because even naturally, your relationship with the perfume is going to change over time. So if it happens because of other people, then so be it.
Yeah.
It's my own fault for listening or watching the video or being in a fragrance community.
So this is what Amina does when it comes to reading reviews. So I used to read reviews a lot before purchasing because I don't want to impulse buy. That was just something I never really did. But when I started my channel, I avoided going on to Fragrantica and all that stuff. So it wouldn't impact how I would express my opinions on a fragrance. Right. But after buying it and then reading the reviews, I do get that feeling that Vivi was explaining of how like, oh yeah, I guess I do smell it now.
I guess that comes. I'm gonna call Amina out, mentioning Baccarat Rouge as smelling like saffron, and a lot of people thinking. She was joking about that, by the way, guys. But a lot of people do think that smells like saffron, and it does not.
That does not. Not to me. It smells like latex to me, but I know a lot of people don't get that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I love like reading about perfume, but I don't love being influenced, and the two don't really go together.
I usually read with a detached mentality. I don't like read it. I just read it just out of curiosity. I don't read it just to get anything from it. I
think that's a skill, Michelle, that you should treasure.
It's probably because of what I do.
Someone asked, what are our thoughts on Michane? I have my opinions on it, but have you two tried anything from that house before?
I tried a sample of one called Niche or Vein and something else, Vein plus something, but it had pineapple in it, and I don't like that smell. I didn't like it, but that's all I've tried.
I've only tried Ani, and I didn't like it.
Yeah, I've tried.
Okay, so I cannot say I didn't like it without giving you context. I'm very particular about things that smell sweet. And that was just not my style. And I know a lot of people love that fragrance, but it was just not my taste.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. I have tried quite a few from that. There was one that I do like. It was Fan Your Flames, because that was a very interesting. I do like coconut. That has a lot of coconut in it, and it's supposed to smell like hookah, I think. So the concept behind that and the smell of it was interesting to me. But when I tried the other ones, including Ani and Oolong Cha was another one, and other ones that had vanilla, I think. I'm not a fan of it. I could see why they're popular, but it just didn't suit me. A lot of them were very sweet, which is something I don't like.
So,
Ashfaq said,
oh
I'm
no.
allergic to, oh my
Oh
God.
no.
Which one? I've actually had more positive like reaction to like perfumes that I've had in the past long time ago when I was not into perfumes at all. I just ended up buying it because I didn't want to buy what everyone else was buying. So I wanted to buy something different. I just picked something else and I hated them. And then I grew up, I ended up enjoying them much later. I don't know if it's because it just I guess masturbation time or if I just grew to enjoy it. And it's a tuberose fragrance, which I tend to not enjoy at all.
I think there have been studies that like certain scent profiles, the more you smell, like it's kind of like there's a progression, and then later on you start to like bitter scents and stuff like that. A lot of people start out with like gourmands and stuff like that, and that's probably more of a reflection of like our noses and bodies.
I didn't want to start with gourmands. I wanted to start with the other stuff. So I guess I still haven't had that gourmand experience. And then now that I'm trying them out, I'm super detached from them. And I just, I tend to not like them that much. And I tend to imagine them as smelling as something else, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I never had that gourmand experience. I am now. I really love Tisendu. I don't know. That was a different one for me, Eve. Thanks for sending it to me.
Yeah, it is not as sweet, I think, as most gourmands.
No, it's not.
I watched this YouTuber called Beauty Notes that I've just been watching for years, and she sells like a lot of discontinued designer scents, like celebrity scents from the past and stuff like that. And then she never used to like sweet scents, and then all of a sudden she's like, "La vie est belle." I love it. So it's not. It doesn't have to be like a big moral thing. I just think that I think it changes. Like I'm not. Yeah. Maybe one day I'll really really like something I hate now. Like it just might happen. I'm open to it.
No.
Oh man, Lost in Heaven.
Oh, yeah. I love
it.
No. I feel bad for you, Ashfaq. I'm sorry.
All right, Bryce is here too. All right, so we hit the 2-hour mark. I think I'm going to wrap it up, but thank you both. You have been so wonderful, and I really enjoyed this discussion with you. And everyone in the chat, thank you so much for participating. Yeah, I appreciate you guys for agreeing to do this. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah, this was fun.
All right, so I hope everyone has a good night, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.